Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have a second draft of Tocasia Dig Site Mentor. This deck is sent to us by long-term supporter Lexa, who says, here's a second look at the Tocasia, the name you always mispronounce, which I do. I usually say Tacasia. I guess I'm mixing the S and the C, but added a couple new cards, made some adjustments based on your suggestions from last time, want to see if there's any more refinement before I start buying cardboard. Absolutely, Lexa. Thank you so much for always supporting the channel. I do appreciate it. And if you'd like to take a look at Lexa's new list before I go through it, you can find the list in the video description below. This is a very, very good Tocasia self-mill strategy. And I think even as is, it's really good to go if you wanted to, jump into the deck. And if you'd like to submit your own deck list for me to make a video on, there is a link to that in the video description as well. And if, like Lexa, you'd like your video to be the next video I work on, well, there is a link to that as well, where you can support the channel and bring your video to the top of the queue. So before we take a look at the list, let's remind ourselves on who Tocasia is and what they do for a self-mill deck. Well, Tocasia, I now learned, was the mentor of Urza and Mishra. I watched Spice 8 Rack's breakdown on all of the story of Magic thus far. It's a great video. I really recommend you go take a look. But they are ready for a tragic fate, let's say. They're very much so that archetype of the mentor. It's like a minotaur, but it's a mentor. The mentor that, dies suddenly and inspires our heroes to become heroes. But enough about her, let's go to the card. So she's 4 mana, 4/3 in Bant colors. She says creatures you control have vigilance and tap to surveil 1. Surveil is like Scribe, but it goes into the graveyard instead of the bottom of your deck. And then she has an activated ability that can only be activated from the graveyard, which is 2 green, white, blue, exile her, and return any number of target artifact cards with total mana value 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So we're really using her for that first ability, mainly for the Surveil one. Someone on one of my previous videos did point out that I think that they thought, and maybe to a degree this is correct, that I undervalue vigilance. And I think I kind of do. I think vigilance is a nice ability on 1 or 2 creatures, but I don't particularly like it as like vigilance on the board. I don't think it's as valuable when we give it to our whole board as opposed to having one big creature with vigilance. I think that generally what's going to happen is you're going to go up against a board. So you've got your board of creatures with vigilance, and you're looking down 3 opponents. And the thing is, it's just going to be true that some of your creatures will not be able to attack. They won't be able to attack certain opponents or at all, right? Like, for example, if you have mana dorks, the idea of them having vigilance is neat. You can get an attack in, and then you can tap them after the fact. But there's going to be a point in a game that a 1/1 just cannot attack profitably. Because of the escalation of boards in Commander, there's always creatures that have to hang back, whether they be just not profitable to attack, or creatures you can't or will not attack with out of just never wanting to put them in harm's way. A lot of these times in certain decks, these can be commanders, where players are just a little bit defensive about their commanders and will leave them back. Tocasia would probably be one of those commanders because of how much the deck relies on her. And even though she's statted very well, she's a 4/3, which is pretty impressive, there's just not a lot of situations you want to risk her by attacking into certain boards. There's always the potential of blocking not going the way you expect, flash creatures, etc., etc. So it's kind of risky to attack into an opponent without being fully aware that the opponent cannot interact with you. So if you're holding Tocasia back, then, there's a bunch of creatures that just can't attack you. Then therefore, if those creatures can't attack anyone, they're being held back. Do you see the kind of like domino effect? So what happens is with all of the vigilance across the board, all of your 1/1s, your 2/1s, all of these small creatures that are very powerful, all of a sudden just can't attack profitably, and therefore the fact that they have vigilance means very, very little. Sorry to go a bit off topic. It was just something that was on my mind a little bit. I think vigilance is a very strong ability, but you really just want it on your big creatures and not so much on all of your creatures. All right, let's take a look at the main thing is the Surveil 1, right? So we want to use creatures that are cheap, we want to have a lot of bodies, and we want to surveil as many times as possible with the goal of milling out ourselves and winning with Thassa's Oracle, which is a great time to transition into looking at the deck itself. As mentioned before, I do just really like this deck. I think the setup is really, really good. We've already gone through a lot of the things that I think are the most egregious. We can look at the curve. The curve's really nice. We can look at the cards that interact with or at the same mana cost as our commander. And, we've got 2 flashback cards, so they are not meant to be played from our hand. We have a few good cards, but generally most of them are either dependent on having our commander out or are dependent on us being ahead. Like Jace isn't something that we really just want to throw out and just leave out there. We want to either be able to protect him or we want to play him later in the game when we're ready to combo off. Conduit of Worlds is just a really strong card, and I think the only one that really does compete with Tocasia as a turn 4 play or a first 4 mana play. And even then, I think it's fine. I think you'd probably just play your commander. So overall, really, really nice. Now, at this point, we're getting into the situation where I'm going to start being really, really picky on cards. And we're going to be picky on certain aspects of the strategy and seeing how far we can kind of adjust numbers to kind of finalize what the list looks like, but also finalize the power level. And in addition, I'm going to suggest a few lands that I think could go in here that aren't in here, because we are at 34 lands and we have 15 basics. I think we could go up. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 4 1-mana dorks. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4. So we have 8 ramp cards, right? I'm not missing anything otherwise. Yeah. Which, if we go into here, we can see, according to our mana base, and once again, I believe it's just the lands, we only have a 50% chance of playing our commander on curve. So I'm going to suggest a few lands, but I'm also going to suggest we do go up to like 37 lands at least. We are very much so a combo deck, and when we don't hit our land drops, we are really, really far behind. We're just playing a lot, because without Tocasia, a lot of our deck just doesn't really do anything. We can set up certain things like Enhanced Surveillance, Quest for Renewal. We can start pumping out a few 1/1s, but until we can start surveilling, we're just not in an ideal place. So we need to guarantee that we can cast our commander. So I'll have some lands to suggest as well. But looking at this deck, there's a few cards that really kind of stand out that I don't particularly like. And the first theme of cards is the win more cards. If we go back to the whole quadrant theory that I had, I'll explain it again because I do have to sit down and make a video of this. Maybe I'll do this tomorrow on Wednesday. We'll see what the mood is. But the idea is this. I want you to picture a quadrant, and the quadrants are 4 quadrants, right? It's cards that are good at neutral, cards that are good when you're behind, cards that are good when you're ahead, and cards that are good when your commander's out. And we want to avoid as much as possible cards that only exist in the last 2 quadrants. Cards that are good when we're ahead and cards that are good when our commander's out, because those cards are Well, practically, they win more, right? They only add to our board when we are already ahead, and therefore, isn't particularly strong in the rest of the game. And this deck has kind of a problem with that already. It's I say problem, let's say struggle, because the deck needing Tocasia is not, it's not a problem, it's intended, right? You've built a deck around a commander. It's like saying that, I don't know, a tribal commander needs its tribal commander lord, for example. And that's not even a good example. Let's think like Kalia the Vast or something like that, right? Where the commander is the power of the deck. And that's not a problem, it's a choice, right? And so when we make that choice, we have to be somewhat cognizant of like how far that pushes us into a certain direction, and we need to be really strict on the cards that fall into the win more category. So, Narcomoeba. What does Narcomoeba really do for this deck? Well, the idea is if we mill ourselves using one of our, let me remember what it's called. Is it an instant spell? No, Sweet Oblivion. If we mill ourselves with a card like Sweet Oblivion or Jace, or if we surveil, Narcomoeba goes into the graveyard. And when Narcomoeba goes from the graveyard from the library, you get to play it. Then, after it loses Summoning Sickness, you can use, which can be done because surveil can be done on your last opponent's turn, you can use it to surveil as another body to surveil and dig further in your deck each turn. But do you notice that drawing and playing Narcomoeba is awful? It's just the worst. You would never pay 2 mana for a 1/1 flyer, right? A 1/1 flyer is a 1 mana card that sees no play, right? So, Flying Men, I believe it is. And with that in mind, like, you would never cast this card. So when is this card good? Well, this card is good when you have your commander out and you're doing the thing. And even then, all it provides you is an additional body, right? There's not a lot of synergy with getting extra cards out. And like, though there's an argument that with haste or some other enabler, it can get you just a little further on a certain turn. And also, I get with haste and cards such as, Quest for Renewal on online, or Seedborn Muse. Once those things are online, with a haste enabler, flipping Narcomoeba represents not just one surveil, but several, even more multiplied if you have enhanced surveillance out. Like, I get it, but did you notice how many good cards we have to play to make this bad card good? I think this card should definitely go out. And for now, I'm just saying it should probably be a land, but I want to take note of this type of card, and we're going to look at a few more of these cards to kind of consider how good those cards are, right? So that's one of them. The other one that comes to mind, we have Deep Analysis, which I think is worth it. The fact that it is draw 2, I think is fine. I like having draw cards in my decks that just draw cards, so I think this is not a problem. But Acorn Harvest, I don't know if I like it as much. It is 2 bodies that get to surveil, but it does feel particularly weak, right? Because unlike something like Join the Dance that works in the way that it's easy to cast from hand and expensive to cast as a flashback, as the traditional sense, the Acorn Harvest works backwards. Just like Deep Analysis, this is a card that you want in your graveyard primarily because you would never pay 4 for 2 1/1s, is the idea, right? Well, here's the thing. That means we have to have it in the graveyard. And once again, we have a limited amount of ways to do that. We don't have, one of those draw discard cards outside of Faithful Mending, I think. Like, we just don't have a lot of really good versions of these cards. And so we're kind of dependent on Tocasia, which actually I should have changed that to the full art so that we can enjoy her full art. Perfect. outside of her, this card is just probably not going to do much. If you happen to draw it, you're just going to kind of be unhappy with that draw, hoping you can get to Fateful Mending and get rid of it, right? And there's Grapple with the Past too to kind of get these cards out, but I just don't think that's enough. I think these cards are just really risky. And like I said before, if you're at neutral or if you are behind, and especially if you don't have your commander, do you really want to cast this card? Do you want to just have 2 1/1s hanging out? I don't really think you do. So I'm not a big fan of that card. Then, further on, and this one's a general one, and it's how many of these Secure the Waste effects do we want, right? These cards are, once again, not very good at neutral, because this deck doesn't really have the means of producing what I would consider a critical mass of mana for this card to be good. Remember, if you ask me how many 1/1s you need to create, I'm going to say 120, right? We've talked about this before, where I generally think that if you're making 1/1s without support, which this deck doesn't support them in terms of power and toughness, you need to be able to take out as many opponents as once, because after you do this, you're particularly vulnerable. Now, that's not as true when you can do it at instant speed. I was talking about Storm the Herd the last time. I think that's the name of the card. But for Secure the Wastes, I could be lenient and say, well, they technically kind of have haste, so you might want to get to, I don't know, 20 to 40 to at least take out one player, and then just count that spell as destroy target player. But that's still a lot of mana that you cannot produce, right? And with that in mind, whereas March of the Multitudes, at least you can start convoking to help you, and they have lifelink. I like them a lot more. I'm just wondering how many versions of this spell that we want, right? And, that's something maybe worth considering. Sorry, I just thought about a right that I will bring up a card. I think I just spoiled it by saying it, but I thought of a card I would like to, if I spell it correctly, suggest. There we go. Okay, so I'm just wondering how many versions of this card that you want, and I feel like 2 might be much. I think I'd just be happy with the March of Multitudes, but just something to kind of consider. Likewise, where are we? I wonder how many of these tap to create a 1/1 blue, like a tap to create a token we want. I know we have 1, and I'm pretty sure we have a second. I could be wrong. I was fairly certain we had 2 of this ability. Okay, oh no, yes, Amara's really good. Do we really want the Stony Brook? I don't know how much we want this ability. At 3 mana, this is kind of an intense ability. It pays off really, really well when we have our combo on, but I think Amara does that already. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna give that a little more thought, but I do think it's close. Both these effects, both the Secure the Waste effects and the Stony Brook effects, are really, really good when you're ahead and are just kind of bad when you're behind. And therefore, I would rather probably have just the one of the 2 instead of both, if there's not more, right, that I'm not aware of. But I would probably just have the one of the 2, and both times I'd prefer the more mana efficient one. Amara is much more mana efficient. March of the Multitudes is much more mana efficient. So even though it technically costs more, I like both of those. And Amara being a 2/2 is easier to attack with than Stony Brook Schoolmaster, which is a 1/2. And of course, the tokens that Amara creates are just a little better. So honestly, I think I prefer the 1, whereas Stony Brook it's just a card that you're going to play and feel bad if you don't have any attacks or you don't have your commander out. And remember, in order to have attacks, you have to be at least ahead of at least ahead of one opponent, or an opponent has to tap out to do so, and then make themselves vulnerable to an attack that will just generate a 1/1. which once again is not very ideal. Like it's just not that great. So those are generally the cards that kind of stick out at me. And I'll keep an eye out. Visions of Glory. Yes, Visions of Glory. Okay. That was the last token producer that I had seen that I wasn't entirely sure of. And Visions of Glory feels like, let me do this. So this card is like very, very much so win more, right? You need a board for this to do anything. In like literally this does nothing when you are far enough behind after a board clear, anything like that, right? It has an interesting flashback cost, and I think that's the main reason it's in here, is that you just aim to flashback it when you're ahead, when you so it costs 4 less, so it's 10 now, so it's a 6 mana card from the graveyard, right? And the idea is that when you are ahead and you have enough creatures, you can cast this. I am going to say a haste enabler, but you give them haste, and then you continue to combo off. And I get why that's good, but that's literally the definition of win more, right? You have to already be ahead, and you already have to already have your commander out. If you are neutral with your opponents, where you have just the same amount of creatures they have, let's say everyone has 5 creatures of meaningful like power, 5 1/1s isn't really going to skew that much, right? So even at neutral, this isn't particularly good. So if you don't lose Secure the Waste, you should probably get rid of this card. This is kind of the poster child of win more right now, I think. I really don't like this card. I think you'd have to bend my arm pretty hard for me to play it. It'd have to belong in a very kind of specific deck. But there we have it. All right, since we're 20 minutes in, let's look at some additions that I am thinking of. And let's start nice and easy, actually, with the lands. I think that's a good place to start. Something that I saw that I thought was worth pointing out, which somehow, where are the other ones? There we go. The artifact lands. Now, I don't know to what degree I agree about this, but the idea is that the artifact lands, if you surveil them into the graveyard, you can then bring them back with Tocasia's ability to return any number of target artifact cards with total mana value 10 or less for free, because they're all 0 mana artifacts. So you can bring these back for free at no cost, in addition to whatever else you're bringing. However, looking down here, we can safely see you don't really have artifacts that you really want to reanimate. The mana dorks are nice. You know, the Greaves and the Boots are nice. Crucible's okay. Halo Fountain and Conduit are fine. But like, are you ever going to hit 10? I don't think you're ever actually going to hit 10. So that's just not where we want to be, right? So I think even though this suggestion is kind of free because you just get to play them, I will tell you it, like consider it, but I don't really see it as being particularly meaningful. So we'll cut those out. All right, let's look at a few more lands that I think are worth running. I think you can get away with playing the check land cycle as just another trio of lands. I'm not going to suggest off-color fetches, just in case we were getting back in that territory. I remember that you don't play them. And so I want to suggest these because you do play the duels. You do play... You said cardboard. I thought you played MTGO. Maybe I'm getting confused. But good luck getting those duels. I'm sure you might already have some, which might make it easier. But with Tundra and the Tundra, the Shakas, the Trio... the Triome, my god, the Trios. The Triome, you have a lot of chances to actually get these lands untapped. So I think they're pretty free to play. I think they're a few dollars American each. Especially this one got reprinted. This one's, yeah. Okay, those two, yeah, they all got reprinted. So a few bucks for all of them. I think that's pretty nice. You can get away with that and getting a nice 3 more. Actually, I should leave those in. 3 more lands to help you fix. Speaking of fixing, you could play Yavimaya, which I'm pretty sure you're not playing. Yeah, you're not playing. You could play Yavimaya pretty easily. Just fixes your green mana, fixes your opponent's green mana, but you know, that's worth it, I think. I think this is just a nice inclusion that you can play and get all the green mana you need. Next, I'm just double checking because I did double check to make sure you didn't have these cards, but sometimes I make mistakes. Otawara, the Soaring City, is free to play. This cycle of channel lands is kind of ridiculous. I think they're just way too strong. The fact that they all come in untapped, yeah, they don't have the basic land type, but the fact that they all come untapped is just ridiculous. I think they're just really, really strong. And having a land that is additionally a temporary removal spell or a bounce spell, let's say, is really, really good. You can use this to knock out a hate piece such as, let's see, not Stony Silence, but Null Rod that would stop all of it. I think Null Rod is for creatures. There's another one, maybe Jinxed Idol or something like that, that stops activated abilities, and using something like Otawara to bounce it at end of the last turn in order to combo off isn't nothing, right? It is something that could happen. And the fact that, you know, it is really hard to interact with is really, really good. And likewise, as you might have figured out, if I'm suggesting this, of course, I should be suggesting Boseiju, who endures, which is a lot more expensive, but also just a very, very good card. We're at the point in this deck that I am going to start suggesting some expensive cards, and I'll leave it to you to kind of discern which ones you're willing to budget for and not. This is just a card that's really, really good in green commander decks if you can slot one in. Like I said before, because they come in tapped, they're basically free, and therefore should be put in there if possible. All right, those are the main lands I would like you to consider. But while we're talking about expensive cards, I might as well they're not all expensive, but I might as well suggest a few cards that are just, I don't know, just generally good, like not really on theme, but are worth considering. This is the thing that I feel like it's kind of the intersection point where we decide on power level of cards, where it's how many powerful non-themed cards we add in. For example, you're already playing Esper Sentinel, which to me signals you're willing to play strong cards that aren't necessarily in theme. Now, Esper Sentinel being a creature that can tap is ideal. I guess it's an artifact, so you can get it back with Tocasia's ability, but generally you're playing Esper Sentinel for the amazing power it provides. So with that in mind, you might be willing to play Rhystic Study. Just a generally very, very good card, just got reprinted in Wilds of Eldraine, somehow even more expensive. Why is this more expensive? Did it not get a non-anime counterpart? Is that why? That might be why. But see, now I want to know. I thought this would. Oh yeah, there it is. It does have a non. Wonder why that wasn't showing. $31. Oh, maybe it was there though. No, that's strange. I'm not going to think too much about it. But Rhystic Study is an immensely powerful card, and it just got reprinted, and it's a very, very good card, and you can throw it in here pretty easily and just have a little extra card draw. You already have Enlightened Tutor to tutor for it. You know, it is just a powerful card that would increase the strength of the deck by a wide margin. Likewise, also just reprinted is Smothering Tithe, which at $15 US is pretty cheap right now. I would definitely, it's probably going to drop a little more, but I would definitely consider picking one up. It does mess with the mana cost of your commander because it's also at 4 mana and you want to play this as soon as possible. But that being said, it's just a good card. You play it, you forget it, you generate a bunch of mana, and you get ahead really easily. And I think you'd be really happy to put that in. Though not too expensive, I think Concordant Crossroads might be something worth considering. It does enable some of the cards that generate tokens, and that makes them a lot better. For example, every time you tap Amara, you get a 1/1 with haste, which you can then tap again to use the Surveil. Now, you could do this manually with like Lightning Greaves, but I do like the idea of being able to do this on opponents' turns with something like Seedborn Muse, right? Because even with Lightning Greaves, Seedborn Muse won't allow the tokens that come out to have haste, so Concordant Crossroads just fixes that problem. I will say, of all the decks I've suggested Concordant Crossroads on, this one does have, I would consider, the most downside for it, because you are the most vulnerable to aggression. Now, as mentioned at the start of the video, probably at length, vigilance is a meaningful thing to have when we have these two cards out. Like, mass vigilance, or just having your creatures all untapped, is really strong with Concordant Crossroads because it represents, you know, soft power of your opponents just looking at all of your creatures and kind of thinking, you know, I'm not going to do all the math, right? That's a lot of 1/1s. They probably could block in a way that's not profitable for me. I'm just going to attack someone else, which is really, really good here. But if you are in a situation where you have opponents who aren't, I'm not going to say fooled by that, but I'm going to say not interested in that kind of thought and want to attack you anyways, they see you as the threat, the Concordant Crossroads will be a lot more detrimental to you because 3 opponents can come against you really, really quickly. And if you have an opponent that's just generating a bunch of evasive creatures or a bunch of, you know, 6/6s really easily, well, you're going to take a rather big beating very, very quickly with Concordant Crossroads. So it's something to consider, but I do think generally it could be good for the deck. I'll leave it for you to decide. The next kind of expensive card, I'm now just going to the general cards that I wanted to add. We've gone past, actually, let's do one more kind of expensive card before we stop defining cards by their price. But Ranger Captain of Eos is really interesting in this deck. I like it because its sacrifice silence ability or pseudo silence ability is just very, very relevant in like the turn you want to go off. You can sack Ranger Captain and then immediately, you know, start your combo once it resolves, which can be really, really nice. But also, you're playing Ranger Captain's best friend, that is Esper Sentinel, which is usually the card you want to tutor with it. So if you're playing one half, it's pretty free to play the second half. Unfortunately, this card is more expensive than I would like. This card could really use a reprint. It's one of those weird cards that was printed into Modern Horizons for Modern, but is not strong enough for Modern these days, which is kind of weird because it's really, really strong. And yet it still has such a high price tag, and I think it's mainly for CEDH. So I hope it gets reprinted. It's a really, really fun card. I'm lucky enough to have my playset for Modern, and so I have my playset for Commander, basically. But it can be really, really good in a deck like this. It does represent 2 creatures. It's better than the 4-mana one because it doesn't clash with your commander. I think you'll be very, very happy. All right, now I'm just going to go into the last, I think, 6 recommendations that I think are just generally good and not based on price. Silence, as mentioned, Ranger Captain's good. Silence is fine. I don't think I'd play this, but I wanted to suggest it anyways. I think at this point, you know, you can just cast this on a certain turn and try to go off. I'm having a hard time deciding how available it is for you to go off on one turn, especially since it's a lot more profitable to go off on several turns, right? Where when you have Seedborn Muse, you're just getting extra triggers, Drum Bellow, and I think a Drum Bellower, and where is our other creature there? White Plume Adventurer also trigger on other people's untapped steps, so you'd be a lot happier to, you know, go off over multiple turns. So I don't know to what degree silence is really useful here, and I think even Ranger Captain's ability is probably better on a crucial turn as opposed to like the turn you drop Thassa's Oracle, for example. But in that way, silence is also very available on that turn, and this shuts off almost everything because it says all spells and not just non-creature spells. So something worth considering. I'll leave it to you to decide. Cryptolith Rite is the one I thought of during the game. I guess something that kind of alleviates the tension of the deck in a weird way, where you're creating all of these creatures that are too small to attack with and otherwise useless without the activated ability. At least Cryptolith Rite will give them an alternative activated ability that's worth using in order to kind of progress your game plan. Now, ideally with Seaborn Muse, you'd have like flash or instant spells to cast in addition, because Cryptolith Rite ain't no Prophet of Curefix. My god, that card is so good. It's not Prophet of Curefix, so you have to get flash in order to be able to use this with Seedborn Muse on your opponent's turns. But this is just generally a good card that you'll be really happy to play. It'll let you ramp. It'll put a little less pressure on your lands. And I think one of the things is with your low land count, I understand you'll be able to surveil into the lands you need, but I think you also want to surveil past lands, right? Every time you surveil a land, I think you'll be happy to discard it unless you desperately need it. And with that in mind, like think of it like this. If you're trying to mill out, every time you have to keep a card on top, you're kind of in a bad situation. This is like a scry problem. The theory is that scrying actively gets worse as you keep cards on top of your deck. So especially subsequent scries. If you have 3 scry ones, like with Viscera Seer, and you leave one on top on the first one, well, the other 2 scries don't do anything. Likewise, if you have 10 surveils, but you keep the card on top on that first surveil, well, the rest of them are useless. So you're generally going to be happier to toss cards into your graveyard, and having, the ability to throw your lands when you don't need them, because you have support from your mana base, from Mana Rocks and Cryptolith Rite, you'll be a lot happier in that situation. So I would recommend this as well. Also, I would recommend Overrun or an Overrun effect. This one's just kind of an asterisk. This can be any kind of pump spell. I just think there might be situations where you have enough creatures on board that an Overrun effect I can't remember it, but our big beast, our big green beast that we all love, one of these cards can knock out a player because you have such an army of 1/1s that are meant for tapping, that it's probably worth just playing one of them. This could even be Beastmaster's Ascension, because you might have enough creatures that with 1 attack you'll get the bonus, but I'll leave that to you. I don't know how much I want to recommend this. It's just something that's worth considering, because it is a backup plan for your commander, and I think you'll be happy to have it. Then, Splendid Reclamation, I'm kind of less down for it since I first thought of it, but I think this is fine. It's just a card you can play as a 4-mana ramp card, but considering your commander's at 4, considering this only works with your commander out, I've kind of changed my mind, and I'm just going to take it out and say, never mind on that. Then we have a last three cards that are all 2-mana creatures that I think are kind of interesting. Thalia, you know me, I love Thalia. I think Thalia is a fantastic commander card and should be played in decks that can get away with it. And I would argue, considering your creature count of 27 and, your lack of very, very many non-creature spells that are kind of essential to be played in a row, I think you'd be pretty happy playing Thalia. And depending on how you feel, I think you could even get away with Deafening Silence, if I could spell it, as, a lot of your non-creature spells are instants, which means you can cast them on opponent's turns. And I don't think there's a lot of situations where you want to cast more than one non-creature spell a turn. Maybe the exception being Silence itself, but this is the kind of card that will very, very much so punish non-creature decks, and you can kind of work around. Likewise, Thalia. Another generically good card that I just think it could be played is Archivist of Ogma. I mean, you can tap it to Surveil. It's just a good card. I think you'll just be happy to play it. I leave it to you to decide. Just generically good. And the last card was a card that I saw from the start, and I think it's interesting. I don't know to what degree I love it, but I get it. The idea, so Reality Chip is a card that's near and dear to my heart because I played it in Blue-White Hammer Time, and it is a very strong card. You play it, you attach it to a creature, and then you have, why can't I remember its name? Future Sight. You have Future Sight, right? You can play cards off the top of your deck. And the idea is that plus Surveil is a very, very potent combination. And now, for me, that would kind of lean this towards win more, because it works the best when you have Surveil out. But I will admit that this card is just good attached to a creature generally, right? Where even if you don't have Surveil, if you can cast 1 or 2 cards off the top of your library, you're going to be pretty happy with the result. So with that in mind, I think it's worth considering. I think, like, it is a 5 mana card, like much like Future Sight, just divided into 2 costs, which I do think makes it better. It is a creature, so at the end of the day, it can tap for Surveil, and it is an 0/4, which is a pretty good early game blocker. All of this put together makes me think, yeah, this is a pretty good card. I'll leave it up to you to play it, though. If you don't play this one, I think that's okay. I just think it's really interesting. Maybe perhaps you would have to kind of test it a bit more before seeing how good it is. For the first time, I noticed there's these 2 little colored slits here, and I wonder if those are supposed to be the eyes of the reality chip. I've always just assumed that the machine and the jelly, I really think this is a really cool art card, but for the first time, I see a face, and I think that's ruined it for me. I'll try to forget this moment ever happened. All right, to conclude, Tocasia is a really cool commander. I really do think that the deck itself, as is already very good, but my suggestions are basically add in more lands. 34 lands is definitely too few. I'd rather you be flooding in your Surveil deck than be mana screwed, because you're going to be in a really bad position if you can't get Tocasia. I almost made the whole video without mispronouncing her name. Tocasia out. Without your commander out, you'll just be in a really bad position, so I'd rather ensure that you get her out and then surveil away the extra lands in the future. In addition, I want you to be a little stringent or a little critical of the cards that are win more in your deck, that are only generally good when you are ahead and you have your commander out. And I think those can easily come out. I would also cut down on cards that only generate more tokens. I think you could probably go down a few of these without much problem. And then up to you, look through the cards I suggested. I think if nothing else, the cards that I think would be the strongest would be Cryptolith Right, and I would definitely try the Reality Chip. I think it's definitely worth just trying. And Concordant Crossroads, depending on budget, I think is a very, very big addition to the deck. And obviously consider the lands. I think they're very important. All right. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Lexa, for always supporting the channel. We're almost at 45 minutes, I think. I do really like this deck, and I could probably talk about it a lot longer, but I'm really interested to see what the final draft is. And if you do get it in paper, I'd love to hear how it works, because this is a kind of creature-based combo deck that is really kind of hard to visualize its strength until you play with it a bunch of times. It's not really the kind of deck I play, so I'm hoping that my additions are helpful, but I am interested to see how it does, because I think the strength is really there. I think it might just kind of, be able to hide behind, innocent small creatures, and then have 1 or 2 really profitable turn cycles where you mill large portions of your deck and get like this big advantage that's really, really hard to deal with. And I do like that it has a combo win. I do like decks that have combo wins, and so I'm a big fan of it. Like I said before, maybe 1 overrun effect to be able to take all those creatures and slam someone in the face with them might be beneficiary, but I leave that to you to decide. If you'd like to send me your own deck so I can make a video of it, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you like Lexa to support the channel and send, you can do that in the video description. There's another link in there. My goodness, my brain. I swear I'm drinking my tea. It's working as fast as it can. and with that link, you can support the channel, and I'll make your video the next video I work on. Finally, if you can like, comment, subscribe, I am always grateful for that. The channel is growing, and I appreciate every set of eyes we can get on it. Thank you so much, Lexa. Your support for the channel is always, always appreciated. You are very much so one of the people who have helped make the channel what it is today, and I am very, very grateful for that. Thank you so much, and good luck finishing this deck. I'm really excited to hear how it comes out.